Here are 5 true scary lockdown stories that capture different aspects of the fear and uncertainty people experience during the COVID-19 pandemic. Story 1. The Silent Stalker. Title: The Empty Streets. During the lockdown in a small town in Spain, Marta, a single mother, found herself alone with her young son in their apartment. One night, as she looked out of her window at the deserted streets, she noticed a figure standing motionless under a street lamp. Initially, she thought it was a trick of the light, but the figure remained there for hours, never moving. Over the next few nights, the figure appeared again, always in the same spot. Marta's unease grew as she realized the figure was slowly getting closer to her apartment building each night. The sense of being watched became unbearable, and she called the police. When they arrived, the figure had vanished, leaving no trace. The police never found anyone, and Marta was left with the chilling feeling that someone had been watching her during those lonely nights. Story 2. The Haunted Home Office. Title: Whispers in the Walls. Mark, a software developer in London, was forced to work from home during the lockdown. He set up his home office in the basement, which had always felt a bit eerie but was the only quiet place in the house. As the weeks went by, Mark started to hear faint whispers and scratching sounds coming from the walls. At first, he dismissed it as his imagination, but the noises grew louder and more distinct. One night, while working late, Mark felt a cold hand brush against his neck, even though he was alone. He turned around to see a shadowy figure slip into the darkness. Terrified, Mark fled the basement and refused to work there again. He later learned that a previous owner of the house had mysteriously disappeared, and the basement had always been rumored to be haunted. The Vanishing Neighbor. Title: The Disappearing Man. In an apartment complex in New York City, residents became used to the routines of their neighbors during the lockdown. Sarah, a writer, often saw her elderly neighbor, Mr. Thompson, on his balcony every evening, watering his plants and waving to passers-by. One day, she realized she hadn't seen him in over a week. Concerned, she knocked on his door but received no answer. She asked the building manager to check on him, but when they opened the door, the apartment was empty, and there was no sign of Mr. Thompson. His belongings were untouched, and his plants had withered from neglect. The authorities were called, but no trace of him was ever found. The mystery of his sudden disappearance haunted Sarah and the other residents, leaving them to wonder what had happened to the man who seemed to vanish into thin air.
Story 4. The Phantom Caller. Title: The Midnight Calls. During the lockdown, Emily, a nurse in Boston, was living alone and often felt isolated after long shifts at the hospital. One night, she received a phone call from an unknown number. When she answered, she heard static and a faint, distorted voice calling her name. She hung up, thinking it was a prank. But the calls continued, always at midnight, with the voice growing more insistent and desperate. Emily changed her number, but the calls persisted, now coming from different numbers. The voice began to reveal personal details about her life that no one else could know. Terrified, Emily contacted the police, but they couldn't trace the calls. The phantom caller continued to haunt her, and Emily was left in a state of constant fear, unsure of who or what was watching her.
Story 5. The Shadow in the Attic. Title: The Unseen Presence. In a suburban home in Australia, the Johnson family experienced an unsettling presence during the lockdown. Strange noises began emanating from the attic at night: footsteps, dragging sounds, and faint whispers. One night, while checking the attic, Mr. Johnson found nothing unusual but felt a cold breeze pass by him. Over time, the activity intensified. Objects in the house started moving on their own, and the family dog refused to go near the attic entrance, growling and barking at seemingly nothing. The family installed cameras in the house and attic, hoping to catch the source of the disturbances. Reviewing the footage, they saw a shadowy figure moving through the attic, its form indistinct and eerie. Despite thorough searches, they found no evidence of an intruder. The haunting presence remained, leaving the Johnson family in a state of constant dread. Trapped in their home with an unseen entity,